Think you're ready to clutter your kitchen with brewing gear? Well, before you start spending, let's talk about what you really need to brew pro beer at home. Whether you're a beginner, or you're wanting to upgrade your equipment, or you just want to fill your kitchen with more gadgets, then this video is for you. Let's explore the essentials you can't ignore, what are the optional things, and what are the things that are nice to have.
Let's first start off with the essentials, the must-haves that you simply can't do without if you want to brew beer.
So one of the very first things that you need is a brew kettle of some kind. This could come in various sizes, so the most basic, easiest, cheapest version is literally a big pot. This is how I started brewing, all grain in a big pot, so it can be as simple as that. Now what I use is this digiboil here. So this is like an electronic controlled, so you set the temperature and it will heat it inside. But either way, you need something to be able to heat your grains and boil your wort. So you can mash in here and you can boil in here. You're gonna need a bag. So this is how I brew my beer. So if you see some of the other homebrew videos I've done on the channel where I actually brew some beer, you will see that I have used this bag here. So with Brew-in-a-Bag, the idea is you have a mash tun and boil kettle is the same vessel. Put grain in here, stick it in the pot, you steep it, and then when you're finished doing the mash, you pull it out, let it drain off, and then you boil the liquids that's left. But you can't do this unless you have a grain bag. Next piece of equipment that you need is a fermenter. If you can't ferment beer, well, you just can't make beer. Simple as that. Plastic, really great for the first time or real beginner starting out. Relatively cheap.
However, plastic can discolor over time, and microbes like yeast, bacteria, and all that sort of stuff can get stuck in scratches in the plastic and can be difficult to get out.
You can also get glass fermenters as well, which are a bit cheaper than stainless steel. The only thing I don't like about glass fermenters is that they're glass, so they can break if you drop them and glass goes shattering everywhere.
Then there is stainless steel, which is the superior option in my opinion. It's easier to clean and more durable than plastic, and of course won't shatter like glass. This is definitely an optional category, as you can make great beer with plastic. You can do more things with stainless steel fermenters, and you can get more features and attachments for these type of fermenters, and you can do stuff like sour beers as well, because microbes won't get caught in scratches, and it conducts heat better, which is good if you want to put in a temperature controlled fermentation chamber, for example. And you can do things like pressure ferment, which is definitely in the advanced category of equipment if you want to go down that path.
Another piece of essential kit is an airlock. So this is an example of an airlock. This is a 3-piece airlock.
Adding sanitizer to the airlock creates separation between the inside and outside of the fermenter. It stops bugs and microbes and other stuff in the air getting into the beer while letting gas out without over-pressurizing the vessel.
Ensuring that your beer won't get infected unless your fermenter doesn't need it. In which case you're fermenting under pressure in a pressure fermenter, because the whole thing will be sealed, so nothing can get in or out. Or you have something like this, which is the Cooper's DIY fermenter I was talking about earlier. So this has a special design in the lid, such that you don't need an airlock.
Or if you're doing open fermentation, essentially fermentation without a lid, though I would recommend looking into how to do this safely first before going ahead and doing it.
The next piece of essential kit, a thermometer. So, you need a thermometer for measuring mash temperature.
If you get your mash temperatures wrong, you won't produce any fermentable wort, which means you won't end up with any beer at all.
Otherwise, if you have something like this digiboil, which is an electronically controlled kettle, or you have some other kind of brew kettle that does have a way that has like a heating element inside of it that you can control, they will usually have their own thermometer or thermostat inside there that can measure the temperature for you. Or perhaps you can get these big pots that have a little thermowell or an inbuilt thermometer in there.
A hydrometer is absolutely essential for making beer. It measures the specific gravity of a liquid, which allows you to know if the fermentation of your beer is complete and you can safely package. The introductory varieties are the floating types, which come in plastic or glass, and you can easily read off the hydrometer. An optional step up is the spectrometer types, where you put a few drops of liquid and look through the light to measure the gravity. Advanced options are electronic hydrometers that you float in your fermenter. So these are quite techy and also require a little bit of calibration to use and are a bit more expensive. Another advanced option is electronic hydrometers, where you inject a sample of your liquid inside the hydrometer and you get an app reading on your phone. These are really expensive, however.
Sanitizer. Now, sanitizer is one of the most crucial things that you could have. Now, yes, it's technically not a piece of equipment, but it is an essential tool, chemical, whatever you want to call it, for making beer. You can't make beer without sanitizer. So anything that your beer comes in contact with must be sanitized.
Depending on your setup, you will need a siphon and or tubing and or a bottling wand. So this will allow you to transfer your beer into the final container that you're packaging in, such as bottles or even kegs. And if you use a multiple vessel setup, this will allow you to transfer beer between the different brewing systems.
Once your beer is done, you're going to need something to put the beer in. Otherwise, yeah, you could, I suppose, just open your mouth straight from the fermenter if you want some warm flat beer, or lick it off the floor. Otherwise, you're going to need something to put your beer in, and that's where these beer bottles come in handy. Now, my advice with bottles is to use flip-top bottles, but if you don't have access to flip-top bottles, or you do want to reuse pry-top beer bottles, then you will need a bottle capper to be able to use those pry-top bottles. And of course, you're going to need bottle lids. So when you're bottling, you're going to need carbonation drops or some sort of priming sugar. So these drops are essentially just sugar, just in a handy drop that allows, like, it's a predetermined measurement, easy to put in. Otherwise, you could measure out some sort of priming sugar. And you can look up online calculators for that sort of thing, but these are pretty easy. You put 1 or 2 in a bottle, depending on the bottle size, and it allows your beer to carbonate in the bottle.
A stirring spoon allows you to properly mix your grains in without getting any dough balls, or if you're doing extract brewing, it allows you to properly mix the extract together. At a minimum, a plastic spoon will work, though the problem with the plastic spoons is that if they get scratched, they can get microbes and things in them that is hard to get out. I recommend a stainless steel. That would be the next step up. They're easy to clean and handle higher temperatures than plastic. And I also would recommend keeping your brewing spoons and your cooking spoons separate. If you are going to use spoons for both brewing and cooking, make them stainless so that you can give them a proper clean, and avoid wooden spoons.
When you're brewing beer, you're going to need something to clean all your equipment. So you're going to need cleaning chemicals. Now, I absolutely love this stuff. This is PBW, or powdered brewery wash. Now, you can use this, or you can use bleach, but I'll touch on that in a minute. But this stuff is amazing, and you can use this beyond brewing. You can use this in your kitchen to clean your pots and pans. It's great. So this is PBW, but you can also get a cheaper version of this, as this is not the cheapest thing in the world, but this is essentially sodium percarbonate and other surfactants and stuff. But you can get a cheaper version of this, which is just the sodium percarbonate, which is a bleaching agent, but it is not as harsh on the environment as actual bleach. If you use the cheaper version of this, you can see like a buildup of like a film or a layer, which is why I use my PBW to wash out my kegs and beer line, because I can't see inside my kegs or beer lines. So I want to make sure I don't get that any film building up. But if it's in like my fermenter or boil kettle, I'm using it regularly, I can see it. So if the film builds up, I could clean it with this or with a sponge or something. And then there's also bleach. The only thing with bleach is just to make sure that you thoroughly clean whatever you bleach with hot water, and don't use bleach on stainless steel. When you're making beer, you're gonna need some way of heating relatively large volumes of liquid. So if you have a sort of a brew kettle like this that you temperature control and it's got a heating element inside, you're all good. But if not, you may need to buy a heating element that you can put in your brew kettle, or if you have like a pot, you're going to need a stovetop which is how I started, or some sort of propane burner, something like that. But essentially you're going to need some way of heating your wort up to mash temperatures, and then you're going to need to be able to boil it after that.
Let's talk about the optional items. These options can make your brew day smoother, help you level up your game, or simply just enhance your brewing experience. This equipment isn't strictly necessary, but it can be quite useful.
One of the optional things, or one of the things I think are optional, are bottle brushes. Now, I absolutely hate these things. I regret buying it because I haven't found that useful or helpful at all, but I do know a lot of people do use them, so maybe I'm just using them wrong. But in my experience, I have found that these are not really necessary. I find that once you pour a beer from a bottle, if you rinse it out straight away, you don't tend to get a buildup of crap in it. I think these are more useful if you have plastic bottles because you get the little, divots at the bottom, and these can help clean those out.
You can buy mini grain mills to crush your malt at home. However, most homebrew shops will mill your grain for you, so it's not strictly necessary. But if you do have one, you can buy uncrushed grain in advance and then crush it when you're ready, and you can do some more advanced things like play around with crush level if you so desire. And also, crushed grain does not last as long as uncrushed grain. A wort chiller quickly cools the wort after boiling. It's optional, but does speed up the process as well. If you don't have a wort chiller, you can just put your beer into a pot and then put that into an ice bath. This is how I started when brewing on the stove. You can also use no-chill plastic containers as well, where you put the hot wort in, seal it, and let it cool overnight. Otherwise, you can use these immersion wort chillers, which make the process a little bit easier as you don't need to transfer beer from your brew kettle, and is especially good if you use an electronic brew kettle like myself.
Hop sieve or a hop bag, or some way of filtering out the hops from your beer. So what you would do with this is that you stick this in your fermenter, and then you stick your hops in the middle so that you can just pull this out and you can take all your hop matter with you, and similar to this. And these are also great if you want to dry hop. These certainly do help with filtering out some of that hop matter so you don't get all that crap from the hops into your final beer. So these are a good idea if you want to do that.
A yeast starter is another optional thing. It's not necessarily a tool or piece of equipment, but is an optional part of your process. It is used to boost the number of yeast you have when pitching your yeast. So if you need multiple packets of the same yeast, you can buy less and just use a starter. But of course, this isn't strictly necessary, and you can just buy more packets if you want.
Just makes life easier is a storage container or containers like this box, and then little jars and things as well. So while you don't need it really, you can just leave your crap lying everywhere, but I find it really helpful to organize my brewing crap so that it's not just lying everywhere, and at least in this container. And then little jars like this, little mason jars, are good for storing things you need. So whether it's, brewing salts or beer findings, and then the spare ones I can even use for harvesting yeast and then pitching it into another beer. They're really great for that as well. And then the other thing that also helps in terms of these storage things is recycling or reusing food storage jars. So stuff like sauerkraut or olive jars or pickled cucumber jars. Obviously you clean them first, but I find them great because I store stuff like some of those brewing chemicals I was talking about, cleaning chemicals, dry malt extract for making yeast starters, or even for making the yeast starter itself. I use a huge olive, I think it's like an olive jar, obviously cleaned and all that, but yeah, they're great as well.
Spray bottles allow you to quickly and easily apply sanitizer to equipment and surfaces. These are optional, but they are quite convenient and mean you don't have to use as much sanitizer as, for example, if you want to sanitize your fermenter, you can just spray down all the surfaces rather than having to fill the whole thing up.
Another piece of optional gear is a secondary fermentation vessel or something similar to rack your beer off. So if you want to age or mature or condition your beer in bulk for an extended period of time, you don't really want that on the yeast. You don't want your beer on the yeast for more than about a month. So if you're going to do that for more than a month, what you can do is you can get your beer and you can transfer the liquid part that's on top of the yeast cake off into a secondary fermentation vessel, which you can then do whatever you want with, which could be, longer maturation, or you could bottle from there. So what that does allow you to do, instead of priming each bottle individually with sugar, you can then put all that sugar into the entire secondary fermentation vessel, mix it around, and then what this allows you to do is get a more consistent carbonation across your bottles.
I find a bottle sanitizing pump really handy, as it allows you to quickly and easily sanitize the inside of your bottles when you package your beer.
Do you know what's not optional? Just ponder that for a minute. Subscribing to the channel. Okay, technically that's a lie. No one's forcing you to subscribe to the channel, but what if you don't want to miss out on more homebrewing and craft beer adventures? Well then in that case, I would advise you to subscribe and like, and of course hit the bell notification so that you'll be the first to be notified when more of these craft beer exploration and homebrewing adventures come out on the channel. And of course, I do appreciate every subscriber and every like that is given on the videos and every beer sacrifice made to the algorithm. Let's talk about advanced gear. So, this is gear that's for people wanting to do some advanced brewing techniques with their home brewing, or stuff that is just really expensive or really highly optional. This is equipment that certainly isn't required to make beer, but if you really, really want to dive deep into the hobby and really just get immersed by it and you're really obsessed by it, then some of this gear could be for you depending on what you want to do. First up is fermentation temperature control. Wait, what? What are you saying? The most important part, or one of the most important parts of brewing beer, is highly optional for advanced brewers only? Yes, but no. Anyway, let me just explain. So yes, controlling the temperature of your fermentation is really critical to making great beer, but if you don't do it, you can still make beer. But when I say fermentation temperature control in the advanced gear category, what I'm really talking about is like a fermentation chamber. At a minimum or at a basic level of fermentation temperature control, if you have somewhere in your house that has relatively constant temperature, a basement or a cellar or something, a particular part of the house that always has constant temperature, that can be good enough. Or in my case, I used to use a floor heater to heat the beer, and I didn't really have anything to cool it down, so I had to brew with the seasons a little bit, or particularly if I wanted to brew lager, I could only do that in the middle of winter. But you can do things like that. For those of you willing to spend more money, you can get yourself a proper fermentation chamber. So you can actually buy pre-made ones. They're really expensive though. But even something like an old secondhand fridge and an Inkbird controller can also do it for you, but it does involve a little bit of mucking around and setting those things up, or lots of money to buy something like that, which is why I have put it in the more highly optional advanced section, because there are more accessible ways to do it. They might not be as good, but there is a way to do it. So pH in your mash is very important, as having the right pH means that your efficiencies will go up, which means you don't need to use as much grain, and it is easier to get higher alcohol beers and all that kind of stuff. And it is one of the things that does have a big impact on your efficiency. But the equipment that you do need for it can be a little bit expensive, at least from what I found. I think I found a particular shop that sells a cheaper version, I think a Kegland, but a lot of them can be quite expensive. But there's also a little bit of mucking around. Some storage requirements, you've got to make sure that they're wet or they're moist in a certain solution when they're stored. And then of course, when you are when on brew day you do measure your pH, you then need to calculate, how much lactic acid or whatever you need to put into the beer to get to the pH, and that needs to be measured. That needs to be measured, then you need to be calculated, then you need to have the lactic acid on hand, you need to measure that and put it in. So it's not necessarily a simple process or an easy process, but it is something for those of you out there who are looking to take their game to the next level and do some more advanced things. And if you really, really want to dial in your mash efficiency and make it as best as possible, then pH measuring equipment is really good for doing that. So you can use pumps to transfer wort between different vessels. You can use gravity for a lot of these things. One of the things that you can't use gravity to do is recirculation. And if you have stuff like a plate chiller or certain types of chillers, you will need plates. You will need pumps and stuff for that as well. And it is in the advanced section because it does add more complexity, more things to clean, more things to sanitize, all that kind of stuff. But and also depending on your brewing setup, you may need them. They could also be a lot of fun as well, I imagine.
A plate chiller allows you to rapidly cool your boiled wort as you move it from your boil kettle straight into your fermenter. These are advanced for efficient cooling, and they are basically a heat exchange system. However, it does add complexity and just another thing to clean.
Food grade oxygen tank and a carbonation stone. This allows you to oxygenate your beer just before it ferments. Yeast does need some oxygen at the start when it starts fermenting. So a lot of us, you can shake your fermenter that way. It gets a little bit of oxygen in, but if you really want to dial it in and get like a precise amount of oxygen into your beer before you stick your yeast in so that your yeast has like the exact, proper amount of oxygen you want it to, then you need an oxygen bottle and a carbonation stone. And finally, we have kegs and kegging equipment. There is a little bit of a learning curve with kegging, and you do need a little bit of equipment to do it as well. So it's not just as simple as buying a thing. There are normally, to get kegging going, you need to buy several things and figure out how to put them together. So there's a little bit of cost to it and a little bit of complexity as well, but it does allow you to do stuff like this where you have your own beer on tap at home, which is an absolutely awesome, amazing thing to do, which if you do make your own beer, I would encourage you to do, but it is not essential to making beer, and you don't necessarily need it to make great beer either. You can bottle condition it, and that is totally fine.
One of the most useful things I have found during my beer journey has been reading and learning about beer. It's a great source of inspiration and gaining further appreciation, and the most useful book I have ever read on the topic is How to Brew by John Palmer, and essentially most of my brewing knowledge has come from that book.
If you do have any questions about any of the stuff I've talked today, please let me know in the comments below, and of course, let me know if you agree with this list or not. But at the end of the day, the goal is to have fun making some great beer and then enjoy that great beer at the end. Once you've had all that hard work go into it, to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And at the end of the day, that is the goal of homebrewing. Ready to brew? Well, you're gonna need a recipe first. And that's exactly what I'm gonna start covering in the next set of videos upcoming in this series, where I'm going to talk about all the different things that you'll want to consider when coming up with that recipe. So make sure you subscribe and hit the bell notification so that you will be one of the first informed when that video comes out, so you don't miss it. And if you got some value out of this video, I'd really appreciate if you hit the like button. And of course, give a beer sacrifice to the algorithm. Meanwhile, you can explore some more craft beer content right here. And until the next one, cheers.